We saw USC, the highest scoring team in the country to this point, and SC, in fact, Jerry, also averaging the most yards per game of any team in the nation. I want to ask you kind of similar framing to what we were talking about with Oregon, because you had a chance to go to camp as well for USC. How does this compare with what you expected after watching the Trojans out in L.A.?
Yeah, this is the danger of on the bus plane tour that you watch a team once, and if it's a bad practice, you come away with a bad opinion. If it's a good practice, the opposite happens. So for me, I came away from the SC practice thinking that, they're not overly physical. It didn't look like some of the other Big Ten practices I had seen. And yet, when you watch the tape of their first two games, and obviously the competition was similar to a lot of other teams in the Big Ten that play non-conference opponents, overly impressed with how good they look, especially at the line of scrimmage, which I didn't come away with a favorable opinion from practice. But again, it's one practice. You have to be really careful to make blanket statements coming away from one practice. But the better competition is going to really show us what USC is like, just like any other team. But they're certainly talent. Mayava is off to a great start. He's a great fit for what Lincoln Riley wants to do on offense. If anything, I think perhaps the offense has gotten off to a faster start than the defense, and that also is a little bit of a surprise to me. But now they're in Big Ten play. They've got to come to Purdue. So it's going to change. It's going to change a little bit.
Well, they've been a big play team so far. On defense, they lead the Big Ten in sacks and tackles for loss. They have 7 plays offensively, over 50 yards already through 2 games, which leads the nation. They're leading the nation in rushing yards per game, and I think people forget how good the rushing attacks were for Lincoln Riley when he had his best teams at Oklahoma. To your point, Jerry, a little bit more physical on the line of scrimmage. And it's interesting to do this comparison game of kind of what you thought versus what you end up seeing. I mean, I would just say Purdue, I can say it now because it's clear that they are dramatically improved in these first 2 games. I think have borne it out. But it was a rough day. The day we were at Purdue practice, we saw a scrimmage. I mean, it was really disjointed. So I'll just say they're better than I think they were going to be, than I thought they were going to be by a pretty significant margin. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would. And it wasn't so much how good or how bad they looked that they were there. It was the fact that it was the second day in pads, and they had a scrimmage over 100 plays. And I think for Coach Odom to sort through that from that day that we were there to today, for him to have sorted through that roster and come up with a 2 deep that has played lights out, that is got a lot of confidence going into the USC game. I think Ryan Brown, Coach Henson, offensive coordinator, I think they've been really the key to the thing, the play calling and the fact that Ryan Brown is playing so well in his first 2 games. But we knew when we were at camp, because of the schedule, that they could be 2-0. But they look more impressive. It's a more impressive 2-0 than I expected, and they'll be ready for USC. This could be a very interesting game.
Yes, I would agree with what you said. I mean, I'm not shocked they're 2-0, but I think your point is a great one. It feels to me like, based on what I saw when we saw it and what we've seen here in these first 2 games, maybe they made the most progress of any team, and perhaps that's to be expected because they're the only team with a new head coach in the Big Ten. They had a largely new roster, and so you're still kind of in that feeling out process. You mentioned Josh Henson. It is pretty interesting that he was with Lincoln Riley for 3 years at USC, and so now he's at Purdue. To what extent, if any, is there an advantage there? Like, how does that factor in? How does the fact that Coach Odom worked with Mayava, he was his quarterback for a year at UNLV, to what extent, if any, do those things factor in?
Yeah, in these situations, they can help a game plan because they can give a defensive coordinator, like Coach Henson, by way of example, could give the defensive coordinator at Purdue a real insight into some of the personnel. There may be something that someone is really good at on the opposing team that hasn't shown up yet, or more important, they may have a problem with personnel on the opponent's team, Southern Cal this is, that Coach Henson knows, but you wouldn't know it by watching the tape, especially of the first 2 games. So if there is an advantage, it's the scouting report, not as much the scheme. It's the scouting report that the previous coach on the team that you're now playing can go to the other staff room. Obviously, Coach Henson can go to the defensive staff room at Purdue and share his opinion about all the players that are coming back from USC. How about the ones that didn't start last year that are starting this year? How would you know? I mean, you watch the first 2 games, but you really wouldn't know as much about them as, by way of example, Coach Henson would know about them.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, I think, Jerry, when you think about 2 programs like Purdue and USC, which you wouldn't think have much of anything in common. They're meeting for the first time since 1998, and yet you have these through lines through the program, which I do think adds a really interesting subtext to the game.